Some of you may have heard of the Great Reset.
What's the what is the Great Reset?
Reset.
So that...
Is it a version of the New World Order? Is that what they're changing the name to?
You know how I feel about political outlooks and differences in political outlooks. I don't think it's a weakness. I think it's a strength. And I think America needs to get back to being able to have a conversation with people who don't agree. We learn so much from each other when we do that. You, I think, are going to hear and learn and question and disagree, or perhaps really agree, like very few podcasts will push you to. You're going to learn an awful lot.
No. So, well, we can go into all this, because it takes, I guess, all the, it's very little questioning going on this matter, but I think that we come down to a big moral question and ethical point. I have other methodological aspects I would like to discuss, because the methodology of this horror or lie is in the permanent looking for ways to harm people who are they don't even know what is hitting them. So that it's called in the phraseology now in use low intensity wars or low intensity conflicts.
Yes, well, at the beginning of the 80s, the emphasis wasn't as much on anti-communism, or let's say there was another factor there to justify activities, which was anti-terrorism, and that anti-drug campaigns now is used to justify repressive or militarization in different places.
But basically, are psychological wars that are very cleverly, oriented to use people, to lie, and then very cruel to the recipient, because there is cruelty in not only in rapes or in assassinations, in destruction of the economy, in making people suffer from lack of electricity and water. So, and there's another item you have to keep in mind, that this is just part of a big iceberg going on.
In the modern world, we are moving ever closer to a widespread acceptance of collectivism, and thus the condition of political slavery to which Spooner alludes. At times such as these, it is useful to recognize that while the majority are complicit in their servitude, in standing on the side of freedom, we unite ourselves in spirit with all other guardians of freedom across the globe. I rebel, therefore we exist. Or as Camus further wrote, every insubordinate person, when he rises up against oppression, reaffirms thereby the solidarity of all men.
When we finally stop fighting against each other, we will gain enough perspective to see the real issue here. Now, one might say that the issue is the king of the empire, the corporate elite that is enslaving humanity. But even that is thinking too small. What is the life force of this system? Is it the small group of people calling the shots at the top of the pyramid?
Brain of some, very distorted brains of some kind of thinking of what to do wrong there. But I want to finish with that the problem have been inside the country, and we haven't analyzed that enough, I think.
Or is it the 7 billion strong army of people complying? That is us. That is humanity. We do it because we want to keep our jobs, because we want to survive. But we only have to struggle to survive if we comply with a system that keeps us in isolation and competition.
The only freedom which deserves the name is that of pursuing our own good in our own way, so long as we do not attempt to deprive others of theirs or impede their efforts to obtain it.
It's our choice. But it's a choice we gotta make together.
Right. Exactly.
But we are now facing a system that has gone half insane. On both sides have their own equal problems, and everybody, it's my way or the highway, and there's no.
We're not doing that.
What?
We're not doing that. You and I are having a different conversation.
What?
Each is the proper guardian of his own health, whether bodily or mental or spiritual. Those who support individual rights are not motivated by an insensitivity to the plight and suffering of others, but rather by the recognition that in granting each of us the freedom to pursue our own good, social cooperation, the division of labor, and a prosperous society emerge in a bottom-up manner, and thus the ability to help others also improves. For without the wealth-generating mechanism of freedom, all the good intentions in the world will not clothe, house, and feed the poor.
Bingo. That's what we're supposed to be doing.
Carl Jung, who lived through the totalitarianism which swept across mid-20th century Europe, likewise observed, "The mass state has no intention of promoting mutual understanding and the relationship of man to man. It strives for atomization, for the psychic isolation of the individual."
If we instead unite as a people, stop complying with the current structures in place, and support one another, we can not only survive, we can thrive. If we focus on solutions and learn about ways to be self-sufficient, we will no longer need to depend on the so-called owners of this world. If we use our creativity to build a new model that can work for everyone, including the environment, the old system will no longer hold power over us, because we're the boss.
The best way to promote social cooperation and a prosperous society is not through top-down centralized control, but to remove the clamps of control and to let individuals make their own choices with respect to their own lives. And this is what a society structured on individual rights accomplishes.
We are the ones who either give it power or let it collapse.
Live and let live, as the age-old adage puts it, or as David Kelly explains. Individual rights leave individuals responsible for living their own lives and meeting their own needs, and they provide the freedom to carry out those responsibilities. Individuals are free to act on the basis of their own judgment, to pursue their own ends.
Let's ask ourselves, what world do we want to live in?
And to use and dispose of the material resources they have acquired by their efforts. Those rights reflect the assumption that individuals are ends in themselves, who may not be used against their will for social purposes. As individual rights leave us free to pursue our own good in our own way so long as we do not aggress upon the person or property of others, it follows that each of us has the right to freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of association and assembly, the right to property and bodily autonomy, and the right to work and retain the fruits of our labor.
We blame society, but we are society.
And you would clearly separate the Marxists out of the progressive movement that have really hijacked the Democrats and the progressive. The progressive era, in my opinion, is over. We're in the Marxist era. If you define progressive as it is usually defined, not the way you just defined it.
Wait a second. Marxism was progressive.
Yes.
Before we knew how it behaved.
Man is absolute lord of his own person and possessions, equal to the greatest and subject to nobody. Individual rights are universal in that they apply to all human beings everywhere. Rights exist regardless of whether they are implemented in the legal constitution of a given country.
And this idea that this word and this concept have been co-opted by people who have no concept of the history of progressives, no understanding of all the great things that we've accomplished, interracial marriage.
Right.
We've been behind all sorts of things from the get-go. And the point is that those of us who are truly progressive are keeping going. I am pro-market where the market works, and I'm up for calling the market out where it fails.
I did the same thing. I mean, look, let's just have a conversation. We're not going to agree with each other. Let's have a conversation. Wait, are you selling out? Are you all of a sudden you're on the left?
Of course.
And I don't know when that happened where where we stopped believing in the Bill of Rights. Let me rephrase this. I have a sneaking suspicion it came at a time, and I don't know when, we lost those Bill of Rights as our cornerstone.
You see it in places like Poland and Hungary, and I could keep going. But what we haven't seen is that do much more than just take place within the existing political structure, right? So it's via the elections or via the ballot box that
So wait, but before we get into the 80s, let me make sure I understand the 70s. You said that we didn't really understand.
It's a joke. It was meant to fool people in 1960s. So you got like clear footprints, but yet you don't have where an impression where the pads of the lunar lander were, or a blast crater where the engines were blasting downwards. And also, the camera followed the capsule straight up, right? And it followed it very precisely, right? And it stopped when it started to pitch over, right? Now, NASA says, "Oh, we did it remotely." Well, there was a 2 or 3 second delay between sending signals and the camera starting to respond, and then another couple of seconds for them to see what's happened. So it's next to impossible to get that sort of accuracy with that kind of, and it's only done once. I mean, they can't sort of keep doing it over and get it right. They do it once and they got it right the first time.
We had the Great Society, which promised war and an end to poverty, which led us to the end of the gold standard and the switching with Bretton Woods and promising the world that we'll buy their stuff. I mean, there was a huge change there. Dual incomes became, a thing. We added women into the workforce really for the first time. So there was this huge change here. Is that play a role with prices? It's like we've got a group of people that want to keep us packed into the systems of 1950 that don't work. All of this doesn't work.
At some level, it's enough. We're in a technological world. We're in a new age.
Yeah, everything below the horizon will seem to go up. Just like if you're in a long hallway, you'll see that the walls will start to move in, and the roof and the floor will start to move into the centre. Yeah, so literally between you and the object you're looking at, there's all sorts of things, sort of like waves going up and down, and while you can't see them, if they're beyond the limit of your sight, sometimes they can still obscure what you're looking at. It's a very difficult subject to get your head around if you're not used to it, but it is perspective. One sort of other proof is there's a place in Bolivia called Salar de Uyuni, which is a salt flat. It's literally 100 miles wide one way and 80 miles across, and it's perfectly flat. And when it rains, literally you get an inch of water, and it looks like a perfect mirror. Now, how does that happen on a sphere? Yeah, it shows you that if you're one end of this salt flat, you can see perfectly clearly the other end 100 miles away. So it's just showing you that the Earth is flat, and without the effect of the waves in the sea, you'll be able to see a whole lot further.
I agree with everything he has to say. I think he'd be, a nightmare to me in many cases, but he at least is looking at a new world. We need visionaries that can understand the technology of tomorrow, the social impact of those things, explain it, and help us get into that. And I see very few of them on the horizon.
You see in a kind of pyramid shape, Yeah, you have a horizon at your eye level, and everything above the horizon will go down into the horizon.
A mind matrix is basically a system for thinking. A mind matrix is behind the mechanics of what is served to one's perception. Basically, the mind has an operating system. Everyone has a natural mind matrix. A mind control matrix is taking over a person's thinking and setting them up with a synthetic mind matrix. A mind control matrix is how they structure the thinking within a fully transhuman person. Feelings, emotions, beliefs, as well as external environmental factors are used to keep one trapped in a certain mind control matrix. Manchurian candidates are in lifelong created mind control matrices, for example. Some of the more immutable from dislodging mind control matrices have been created over a long period of time in a target's lifetime.
That might sound really crazy, but if you look at look out on a day that's got broken cloud, you'll see that the sun rays will come out at an angle. Most people have seen this. The rays come down in at angles. If the sun was 93 million miles away, then all the light will be coming parallel. So if you imagine, there's no way to show 93 million miles, but something way over there, all the light that reaches this globe will be parallel. There's no way that light can come that far and spread out like that. Now, if you follow those light rays, you'll see exactly where the sun is. And as I said, it works out to be about 3,100 miles. Now, if that's the case, and the sun is circling over this flat plane, yeah, it's light.
See, here's the problem, I think. It's the greed of one group and the willingness to gamble with other people's lives and the power and establishment in the government.
And the old Viking, blue-eyed, blonde aristocrats, more or less, were pushed into the background, or they intermarried with the black nobility and became contaminated. And this is what you have. Of course, the surviving royal family in Europe today is the royal family of England, and they have been black nobility since the 12th century, when the Este family of Italy married into the British royal family. And that's all being a member of the world order means. You know how to use other people and profit by them. And whether you slaughter them or rob them or torture them, whatever you do, you make money at it. And this is what they do.
Disney and NASA have worked very closely together. Disney worked with NASA on the moon project. Yeah, they made it, they filmed it so that it would be entertaining for the masses. Yeah, and they're still working with NASA. I absolutely believe that Stanley Kubrick, filmed the moon landing. He left a few clues just to say, so that
like Michelangelo.
Yeah, so that we eventually would know that this was his work. Yeah, I did this.
Okay, but wait.
What dimming a memory is making a memory less likely to fire, but it is not completely blocked off from firing. The shadow government likes methods that are as covert as possible. Dimming a memory is tactically sound in terms of exposure.
I got pushback from people that were like, so you want to give your hard-earned money, more of it, away to the government, and you think the government's going to solve this? My perspective was, if you just looked at it this way, if you could give, let's just get crazy.
Well, it wasn't until much later in my life that I began to understand that anti-communism was used to cover or to justify all of these types of activities, when in actual fact the objects or victims of these activities were not, in many cases, communists at all. They were nationalists, they were populists, they were perhaps socialists. But I began to ask myself at one point, why is it that social or popular revolution in an impoverished country is such a threat to the United States?
Just get crazy. If you could give 25% more money to taxes, but the world would be 50% better, right? Wouldn't you want to invest in that? Like, I understand that people are check to check.
Because almost by definition of the anti-communist political culture in which we live, any popular revolution is a threat to the United States. Communist is a very dangerous label, I've eventually learned. It's used to discredit any revolutionary movement.
Jack, I understand, but if people like me, people that earn a good amount of money, are the ones who are going to be hit the hardest. If you wanted a better world, wouldn't you be willing to invest some of your money into that better world?
It has been used, and I used it myself constantly, to discredit any popular revolutionary movement that seeks revolutionary change or fundamental radical change in favor of the poor people. And in the so-called third world, you know, these are the vast majorities of the populations. The tradition has been that most of the good arable land has been cornered or brought under control through ownership by a very few families. And the vast majority of the rural population, the peasants, are, if not totally marginalized from the money economy, certainly they are living a subhuman existence, and if they have any plots of land at all, it is normally the minifundia problem, that is, plots that are too small to be economical.
And if that money goes to making sure that no one has to do this in the future, and that we develop this these better communities in these places that have been fucked for decades, you don't want that? You don't want a better world for your children?
These so-called oligarchies are the merchants, the bankers, the commercial interests, and
the royal family of England.
I think this is one of the biggest problems.
And as I said before, we were the people who were most supporting them, and they were the people who, during the 1960s, were most opposed to any basic fundamental reforms. Well, getting back to the question of why social revolution is a threat to the United States.
You don't want that? You don't want a better world for your children? You don't want a safer world? What do you want to do, die with all this money in the bank?
I think the analysis has to come back to the United States itself. When asking the question, why is it by definition a threat to the United States?
Like, it's crazy.
It's a question of, when you look at the greatest anti-poverty program we've ever put in place, it's Social Security. Now, the flip side of that is what they'll say is that the problem with some of this is they don't trust the mechanism.
Namely, the requirements of the Soviet Union, of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, to maintain a monopoly on power in that country. And I think most political scientists would agree that any society's or nation's foreign policy is largely determined, or a product significantly, of its internal system. And that is why, in trying to raise the question and get students, for example, as I'm touring around universities, to ask themselves the questions of why is it that all this political repression is necessary? Is it in our interest, or is it in the interest of just a few people in the United States?
It's not as clean cut as everybody thinks it is. These guys were deep thinkers.
So you want to give your hard-earned money, more of it, away to the government?
Well, yes.
Men.
Let's just get crazy.
I've always asked myself the question, or I haven't always, but I do now.
But do we all agree it has to be unanimous? They all voted yes, it has to be unanimous.
Could you explain that three-tier system to me?
Well, nothing can really function unless there's a hierarchy. Somebody at the top has to tell the people lower down what to do and how to think and how to act and so forth. So in the world order, you have a very distinct hierarchy. Dynastic families who can trace their lineage back thousands of years. And because they have learned to survive and how to manipulate other people to do their will.
The government shall provide for the general welfare of the United States, which upheld the original Articles of Confederation, which said that each state has complete autonomy. And therefore, the bill for the general welfare of the United States is the bill upholding the Articles of Confederation.
And so the Romanov heirs, such as are still alive, are the real owners of our Federal Reserve System.
But they perverted that the Constitution says that you have to uphold the general welfare of the states, which is what it says. And all of the government programs for citizens are totally illegal. because only a state has the power over a citizen.
And quite frankly, we've got to fight the kleptocrats in center left, center right, Wokistan and Magistan, and get back to the business of innovation. I'll try to give you a history that you probably didn't know, involving a through line that is incredibly simple, that explains why everything is falling apart, and try to use as few assumptions as possible.
And so, as I say, they murdered the richest man in the world, took all of his money.
Well, what year was that, by the way? What year was that when they murdered the Tsar?
Well, that was 1918. They had the communist revolution in 1917. And the first thing they did was go in and loot the whole country. They took all the money. And so the result was the new Soviet empire had no operating capital, and they couldn't tax anybody because they had murdered all the people who owned anything.
The people who rewrote we started off with the Articles of Confederation. See, that's where the Confederacy comes from, because when the southern states seceded from the Union, they were exercising the prerogative which they had been given during the Articles of Confederation to secede at any time. You see, the Articles of Confederation gave every state complete autonomy over its own power, over its own people. And so the southern states in 1860 decided to secede from the Union, which they had a perfect right to do. But in 1787, they rewrote the Articles of Confederation, and it was actually a secret convention of Masons in Philadelphia, and they rewrote the Constitution to create a federal government, mainly for the borrowing power. The bankers wanted a country which could have a borrowing power in which could pay back the money. And that was not possible under the Articles of Confederation.
If they can say everybody who is at this level, you're going to get a home. You know, as long as they can play the Oprah card, you get a home and you get a home and you get a home, nobody cares. They'll deal with the aftermath later. So it's the collusion.
Are the floor mics live? If they are, it might make it easier for people with questions to come down to the mics, and I'll go back and forth in order. Yes, ma'am.
We are part of a non-consensual human experimentation which uses highly advanced electronic technology without our informed consent or knowledge.
And I am also targeted, and this is my story. My name is Sandra Fields. I'm an architect, recipient of Who's Who of Women in America Achievement Award, and have run a successful business for over 28 years. My life and livelihood have been compromised for the last 11 years by being attacked by electromagnetic radiation torture and by organized stalking. Thousands of Americans are currently suffering from chemical, electromagnetic, psychological, and physical torture. Our servicemen, prisoners, and thousands of unknowing, innocent civilians are currently being lamed, tormented, and tortured as a result of military research, medical research, pharmaceutical research, physiological and psychological studies that have virtually destroyed participants' sanity, physical well-being, reputation, and privacy.
How long? We haven't had a free market. It's
an illusion.
Pardon me?
It's an illusion.
Yes.
Yes, you're right. For some reason.
And
wait a second.
What? And we're dismissing the people who say, I don't think I can trust this system anymore. If we shut them down, we're nitroglycerin in a paint shaker.
I'm looking forward to this, man. You walk behind me in a debate. Come here, man.
Welcome. Yeah. It's kind of cool the first time you do it, and it always feels a little, but it's just, there's nothing in this money game.
So let me just say this. I've owned my private plane, and it's it's the only thing wealth changes is a private flight. However, I'm with you. I'd be penniless and start over if we could restore actual accountability, responsibility, and freedom.
Yes, that's what I would like to think we would do. But I think a lot of people aren't in that game. I think that a lot of people are desperate.
I warned you a few months ago about the Great Reset.
I think that a lot of people are desperate